All right, here's a preview for tomorrow's stuff, the Phillips curve. Hey, Bill Phillips, a New Zealand economist, he says, I got a question. Is there a relationship between the rate of inflation and the unemployment rate? Well, if you've got a question about the relationship between two variables, there's only one thing to do. Scatter plot. Inflation rate on the y-axis, unemployment rate on the x-axis. You look at that scatter plot, and there's a nice relationship there. In fact, let's prove it statistically. Let's get a line of best fit. And there's a trade-off between inflation and unemployment. That inverse relationship between those two variables. Hey, let's publish a paper. Phillips publishes a paper. They go, hey, there's this thing called the Phillips curve. If inflation goes up, unemployment goes down, and vice versa. And that was something we started taking a look at. Let's challenge that. Let's see, does it work in different countries over different periods of time? Some economists started looking at other sets of data that look like this. Oh, man. There is not a clear relationship there. And even if you start to argue about, well, there could possibly be a downward sloping, well, you could argue for just about any line with that little blob of data there. Points all over the place. Well, we're looking at the statistically and we say, well, we want to know if it holds over different periods of time. Let's break this data. You got about 50 data points. Let's break it up into shorter periods of time. And then let's see if over that period of time, if that short-run relationship held. And guess what? Boom, it did. So statistically, we start to understand this relationship holds when we look at shorter periods of times, but it doesn't hold over the long run. Those Phillips curve showed that there's some shift that occurs in the long run, but not in the short run. In the short run, that relationship holds, so there's movements along that curve. At this point, we understand we have some statistical idea of what's going on, but we haven't looked at the economic reasoning. So let's take a look at our aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. What do we know? Boom. Here we are. We're at full employment. We would be at point A. GDP is at the full employment level, right? What does that mean for unemployment? We're at the natural rate of unemployment, zero cyclical unemployment, the natural rate. So that means if we look at the Phillips curve, where are we on the Phillips curve if we're at point A in aggregate demand, aggregate supply? We're right here at the natural rate of unemployment, which I labeled U bar. So that tells us where we are on the short-run Phillips curve. Any other point on the short-run Phillips curve is a deviation from the long run because in the long run we know we're always back at Y bar. And Y bar corresponds to U bar. So we're at Y bar and it's U bar, the natural rate of unemployment. Now, that being the case, let's take some shock. Let's say foreign incomes rise. So we know that's going to affect net exports. We're going to increase our net exports. Aggregate demand is going to shift to the right. Price level goes up. GDP goes up. Hey, that's pretty simple in the analysis right there. AD shifted to the right. We move from A to B. Okay, but what does that mean for the Phillips curve? In the Phillips curve, we moved into an inflationary gap. Unemployment fell below the natural rate, but the price level went up. We got an acceleration of inflation. So moving from A to B meant moving from A to B on the Phillips curve. And B, though, is not in the long run. We had a deviation, so we moved along the Phillips curve. We're out of the long run full employment situation. That's short run. It's just a deviation. Okay, so there we are at B. So important lesson we learned right here to carry on for tomorrow is that if anything causes aggregate demand to shift, that's going to cause a movement on the short run Phillips curve in the opposite direction. Notice aggregate demand shifted to the right, movement to the left. Now, in the long run, what would happen? Well, what if we had a fiscal or monetary policy response to that? We'd do contractionary policy. Aggregate demand would shift back to the left. We'd move from B back to A and B back to A. So it's really there it is. The SRAS shifted to the left. Price level goes up. Output falls back to potential, to full employment. What does that mean then if we move from B to C in terms of that self-correcting mechanism, that long-run adjustment? Over here, we move to a point C where we got higher inflation, but we're back at U bar, back at the natural rate. So C is directly above A, which means we're on a new short-run Phillips curve. We're not in the short run anymore. Short-run Phillips curve, or the short-run aggregate supply curve shifted, and the short-run Phillips curve shifted. And that's the lesson we take home from that. Is a shift in short-run aggregate supply causes a shift in the short-run Phillips curve in the opposite direction. SRAS shifted to the left, SRPC shifted to the right. So a couple of things in terms of the mechanics there. What causes a shift and what causes a movement, but that's related to shifts in aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So we now understand what's causing the relationship that we saw in the short run that Phillips discovered, which does not hold in the long run. In fact, if you look and connect the dots for the long run, A and C, well, what we get in the long run is a Phillips curve that is vertical. Connect those dots. In the long run, there won't be that relationship because we'll always be back at U bar, the natural rate of unemployment. All right. Hey, good luck tomorrow. Good luck the rest of the year.